Long, long ago, more than 2.5 billion years in the past, the Earth spun under a sky that would have startled our eyes. To step into that world would have been to step into a dream, a place where familiar rhythms existed, yet clothed in alien garments. The sun still rose, the waves still rolled upon the shore, volcanoes still spat fire, and rain still fell. But every detail of that ancient Earth carried a strangeness, as though the planet were rehearsing for a play not yet ready for its final act. The sky, for one, was not blue. It was a hazy cloak of orange and amber, stitched together from methane and volcanic gases. Imagine standing on a rocky shore, watching the dawn, not a golden sunrise with rays scattering through clear air, but a dim and filtered glow struggling through a dense veil. The young sun itself was fainter than it is now, its light weaker, and through the haze it cast a subdued radiance, one that painted the world in perpetual twilight. The shadows were softer, the colors muted, the atmosphere heavy with heat and gas. Breathing would have been impossible for us, for there was no oxygen in the air, not a trace to comfort the lungs. Below that sky stretched the oceans, and here too the differences would have astonished us. These seas were vast and ancient, but not the sapphire blue we carry in our modern imagination. Instead, they were heavy, clouded with dissolved minerals, especially iron. They shimmered not with clarity, but with thickness, a weighty richness that turned the waves into vessels of hidden transformation. When the wind swept across the surface, the waters rippled with a dull gleam, as though the planet itself was holding secrets just beneath. And the land, the continents had not yet risen in their familiar forms. What land existed was young, restless, and fiery. Great volcanic chains stretched across the surface, their mouths glowing with molten rock that spilled down into the sea. Black basalt cooled along the coastlines, only to be covered again and again with fresh eruptions. Each outpouring of fire released gases into the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur. The air was thick, acrid, and hot, a mixture we could never survive. But to the Earth of the Archean, this was the breath of life. And life was indeed here. That is the wonder of it. Even in such an alien world, the spark of life had not only appeared but spread, yet it was not life as we know it. There were no fish darting beneath the waves, no insects crawling on the shores, no trees swaying in the wind. Life at this time was invisible to the naked eye, tiny as dust, fragile as morning dew, and yet it was everywhere. Bacteria clung to the surfaces of rocks, forming thin films that glistened when the faint light touched them. In shallow seas, layered colonies known as stromatolites rose like low mounds, their surfaces textured with the work of countless microbial builders. Entire reefs of these strange structures lay scattered across coastlines, silent monuments to life's earliest architects. Most of these organisms lived without oxygen. They did not need it. In fact, they could not tolerate it. They thrived in a world where other chemical reactions sustained them, reactions that had nothing to do with breathing as we know it. For billions of years, these organisms had found stability in such conditions, shaping Earth's chemistry in ways both subtle and profound. To them, oxygen was not a gift. Oxygen was a threat, a poison, a stranger not yet arrived. And yet within the countless multitudes of these microbial worlds, something was stirring. A small group, scattered across shallow sunlit waters, had stumbled upon a new trick, a way to capture sunlight and use it to split water, releasing energy and, quite by accident, something the world had never before known: oxygen. But in this first chapter of our story, that secret still lies dormant, just beginning to whisper at the edges of possibility. Earth, with its orange skies, volcanic fires, and mineral-rich seas, is waiting for the quiet breath that will rise from its oceans, waiting for the invisible tide that will sweep through stone, air, and life itself, waiting patiently for oxygen, the breath of time. Beneath the dim amber skies of the Archean Earth, where volcanoes thundered and oceans heaved with minerals, the real rulers of the planet were not towering creatures, nor swift swimmers, nor birds upon the air. No, the sovereigns of this time were tiny, so small that they could slip through your fingers unseen, so delicate that an entire colony could rest upon the tip of a pin, and yet so powerful that they would one day remake the face of the planet. These were the microbes, the hidden kingdoms of life. Imagine walking along the shore of a shallow bay, if such a thing had been possible for us. The tide rolls in, thick and metallic, leaving behind films of greenish-brown slime clinging to the rocks. What appears lifeless to the human eye is, in truth, a bustling city. Within every shimmering layer of slime, countless single-celled organisms crowd together, working, reproducing, and shaping the chemistry of their world. They are communities, bound not by walls or languages, but by shared survival. Further out in the shallows, one would find stromatolites, living reefs built not by coral, but by bacteria. Layer upon layer, these organisms piled upon each other, forming domes and ridges that broke the surface of the sea like the rounded backs of sleeping animals. They grew slowly, almost imperceptibly, yet persistently, leaving behind stone records that we can still find today. To rest one's hand upon a stromatolite is to touch a living thread that stretches back more than 2.5 billion years, linking us to those first microbial architects. Life in these kingdoms was not peaceful in the way we might imagine. Though invisible to us, their world was alive with chemical rivalries. Some microbes drew their energy from sulfur bubbling out of volcanic vents. Others fed upon the carbon compounds drifting through the oceans. Each had carved out its place in the delicate balance of the Archean seas, competing for resources, expanding when they could, retreating when they must. And yet, despite this hidden struggle, their world was astonishingly stable. For hundreds of millions of years, the oceans had been ruled by anaerobic organisms, life that had no need for oxygen. In truth, for them, oxygen was unknown. Their chemistry, their very existence, was built upon its absence. To breathe, as we do, would have been unthinkable for them. Their survival depended on a different kind of metabolism, one suited perfectly to the oxygenless world they inhabited. But here, in quiet corners of the sea, something new was beginning to stir. A small group of bacteria, seemingly ordinary among their kind, had stumbled upon a power that no other had mastered. They discovered that the light of the sun, that pale glow straining through the methane sky, could be harnessed directly. Using pigments within their cells, they caught the faint rays, drew energy from them, and in doing so, split the molecules of water around them. From this reaction came the energy they needed, and a byproduct, something invisible, something the rest of the microbial world could neither use nor tolerate: oxygen. At first, this change meant little. The oceans were vast, the microbes few. The oxygen they released vanished quickly, binding to iron in the seas, dissolving into reactions that scrubbed it from the water as soon as it appeared. But what mattered was not the effect, but the process. For the first time in Earth's long story, there were creatures who made their living from sunlight and who exhaled oxygen into the world. If we could look closely at them, closer than the human eye allows, we might see their forms, simple spheres and rods drifting in the water. But what we would not see is the quiet revolution taking place within. These were cyanobacteria, the first breathers of oxygen, the silent heralds of a new world. They did not know it, of course. To them, this was survival, no different from the work of any other microbe. But to the Earth, it was the beginning of a transformation that would ripple across billions of years. For now, the kingdoms of microbes remained hidden. Their mats clung to the shorelines, their stromatolite cities rose in the shallows, their colonies drifted in the seas. The haze above remained thick, the oceans still metallic, the volcanoes still restless. Nothing yet seemed different, and yet, beneath the surface of perception, change had already begun. The breath of oxygen whispered into the oceans, a faint murmur that would one day roar into a world-changing chorus. The story of oxygen does not begin with a roar, nor with a sudden blaze of life. It begins with whispers, with the faintest of breaths drifting into a world unprepared for it. It begins with the sunlight itself, falling weakly through an amber sky, touching the surfaces of the Archean seas. In those seas, scattered across shallow waters, lived colonies of cyanobacteria, little cells no bigger than dust, yet armed with a secret as powerful as fire. They had learned how to draw life from light, how to reach out with their pigments, capture the energy of the sun, and turn it into sustenance. With this discovery, they opened a door no organism had ever passed through before. In their tiny reactions, they broke apart molecules of water, pulling the hydrogen to feed their energy needs and releasing the oxygen as waste. Waste, yes, that is what oxygen was at first. To those cells, it was not a treasure. It was not a breath of life. It was simply an excess, something pushed aside in the quiet work of survival. And yet, that waste was unlike anything the world had ever known. It drifted into the water as invisible bubbles, faint streams of gas rising from microbial mats, tiny offerings to a planet that had never before tasted such a thing. At first, the oxygen did not linger. The oceans were vast, heavy with dissolved iron, and every trace of oxygen that appeared was swallowed at once. When oxygen met iron, it clung to it, forming rust that drifted downward like dust, layer upon layer, to settle on the seafloor. If we could have watched it happen, we would have seen nothing. The waters looked the same, the skis unchanged, and yet something irreversible was underway. The seabed was recording it, writing the story in bands of red and gray that would one day harden into stone. These were the first banded iron formations, ancient records of oxygen's secret arrival. Microbes did not know what they had begun. To them, the process was simply life. Light in, energy out, oxygen released. Day after day, tide after tide, they worked, multiplying across the shallows, spreading in mats that carpeted the sea floor. Their colonies rose into reef-like stromatolites, their growth so slow that no eye could have noticed it. Yet across millions of years, these structures became vast cities of bacteria, each one breathing, exhaling, changing the chemistry of the world grain by grain. It is tempting to imagine that such a revolution would be loud, swift, and unmistakable. But the first spark of oxygen's story was quiet, as all great transformations often are. No thunder accompanied it, no lightning, no dramatic upheaval. The planet seemed as it always had: fiery volcanoes, methane skis, metallic seas. And yet, in the stillness of those shallow waters, something utterly new was stirring. The invisible gas, rising from microbial mats, was rewriting the rules of existence. If you had stood on a basalt shore, watching the tide sweep across the rocks, you might have seen stromatolites glistening as waves lapped against them. They would have looked unremarkable, lumps of stone or layered mounds barely reaching above the waterline. And yet within them, countless cyanobacteria were at work, cells splitting, replicating, shimmering with life too small to see. Every moment, they were releasing oxygen into the water, like lanterns quietly lighting one by one in the darkness of time. It would take millions of years before those sparks gathered into a glow, and hundreds of millions before the glow became a blaze. But in this chapter of Earth's story, the fire was lit. The first spark of breath had been struck, and though the world had yet to notice, nothing would ever be the same. Oxygen had arrived. The Archean oceans were vast and heavy, holding within them the ingredients of change long before change itself was ready. They stretched from horizon to horizon, restless under the orange haze of the sky, and in their depths lay a secret that oxygen would soon awaken. To gaze upon those waters was to gaze upon a cauldron of chemistry, an ancient brew rich with dissolved iron. Iron was everywhere. It flowed from the seafloor vents in plumes of black smoke. It washed down from volcanic slopes in rivulets that carried minerals into the sea. It drifted invisibly in solution, giving the water its strange, metallic character. If you had dipped your hand into those ancient waves, it would not have been like dipping into the clear, crisp oceans we know today. It would have been like touching liquid shadow, thick with hidden weight, tinged with the faint taste of metal. For countless eons, this iron-rich ocean had been a home for life. The microbes that thrived there had no quarrel with it. To them, it was simply the world they knew. But when the first breaths of oxygen began to seep into those waters, something extraordinary happened. Oxygen is a restless element, quick to bind, eager to combine. And when it met the dissolved iron that drifted through the seas, the two embraced with sudden intimacy, forming iron oxides, rust, in its simplest form. Imagine it, every bubble of oxygen released by cyanobacteria found a partner in the water. The gas did not drift upward, it did not rise to fill the air. Instead, it vanished almost as soon as it was born, clinging to the iron around it. Together they formed tiny particles that drifted downward through the water, grain by grain, like invisible snow. Over millions of years, this quiet snowfall settled onto the seafloor, building layers of red and gray, rust and stone. These layers became what we now call banded iron formations. Stripes of history, painted across the ancient seabeds, stacked patiently one atop the other, each one a record of a day, a year, a million years of oxygen's secret work. Even now, billions of years later, these formations remain among the oldest rocks we can touch. They are Earth's memory of its first breath, a diary written in iron. If we could stand upon the Archean seafloor, the sight might be hauntingly beautiful. The waters above would be dim, light filtering weakly through the methane sky, turning everything a muted green. Around us, microbial mats would spread across the sediments, each one releasing bubbles of oxygen too small to see. And then, drifting downward like dust in a quiet room, the rust would fall. Tiny particles, settling slowly, soundlessly, layering the ground in a tapestry of iron. For ages upon ages, this process continued. Oxygen could not escape into the air, for the oceans were hungry and the iron within them insatiable. Every atom of oxygen that appeared was consumed, leaving the atmosphere unchanged. And yet, even in its capture, the oxygen was shaping the world. With every band of iron laid down, with every stripe of rust painted onto the seafloor, the Earth was being prepared for a future it could not yet imagine. To us, banded iron formations are rocks, heavy, ancient, cut by miners and studied by geologists. But to the Earth, they are something more. They are the pages of a storybook, each line a sentence, each stripe a paragraph, chronicling the first attempt of life to alter the world around it. They are in their own way monuments to the microbes that built them, monuments that say, here in these silent oceans, oxygen first began its work. And though the seas still swallowed every breath, though the skies remained dim and orange, though no creature yet inhaled this strange new gas, the process had begun. Layer by layer, the oceans recorded it. Rust by rust, the groundwork for the future was laid. The oceans of iron had become the first stage for oxygen's grand performance, a stage upon which the story of life would unfold. If you have ever wandered through a desert canyon or stood before an outcrop of ancient stone, you know that rocks have a way of speaking. Not in words, not in voices we can hear, but in the silent language of layers and colors, of textures and seams. To a geologist's trained eye, every stripe and vein tells a story of fire and flood, of shifting mountains, of long-forgotten seas. But few stories are as profound, as world-changing, as the ones written in the red and gray stripes of the banded iron formations. Picture them, slabs of stone that gleam with alternating layers of dark and light, rich crimson bands pressed against steely grays. They are beautiful in their starkness, like the strokes of a painter's brush, repeated over and over through the ages. And they are ancient, some of the oldest rocks still preserved on Earth. When we run our hands across them, we are touching the physical record of events that took place more than 2.5 billion years ago, events set in motion by the breath of the smallest organisms. These rocks are not random. Each band, each stripe is the memory of oxygen's first arrival. For eons, the oceans swallowed every trace of the new gas, binding it to the iron dissolved in the waters. Whenever oxygen appeared, it left behind a record, rust particles sinking to the seabed, layer upon layer pressed into permanence. When conditions changed, when oxygen waned or iron grew scarce, the darker bands formed, recording the rhythm of a planet in transition. Back and forth, red and gray, like the beating of a deep geological pulse. Imagine standing in front of such a stone face today. It rises above you, a wall of memory taller than houses, older than continents, older even than the first animals. The stripes stretch across the surface like lines on a book's page. Each one is not a year, nor a century, but millions upon millions of years. Each one whispers of microbial mats releasing oxygen, of oceans consuming it, of the slow dance between life and chemistry. It is not just stone, it is history solidified. For the people who first encountered these rocks, long before science explained them, the banded iron formations must have seemed mysterious, even sacred. Here were stones with colors so vivid, stripes so precise, that they looked crafted by careful hands. And in a sense, they were. Not the hands of humans, but the hands of microbes, tirelessly layering oxygen into the Earth's foundation. The builders were unseen, their tools no larger than molecules, but their monuments were vast, stretching across continents, surviving for billions of years. In their quiet way, these rocks remind us that change often begins unnoticed. Oxygen did not fill the air overnight. It did not sweep across the seas in a single tide. It came in whispers, in small breaths released by countless cells, in particles drifting down through water to settle in silence. The banded iron formations are the proof of that patience, the evidence that great revolutions do not always thunder when they arrive. Sometimes they build slowly, one layer at a time, until at last the world is remade. And so the red rocks speak. They tell us of oceans that once shimmered with iron, of microbes that learned to turn sunlight into sustenance, of oxygen that struggled to find a place in a hostile world. They tell us of extinction to come, of skies that would clear, of futures yet unimaginable. Their voices are not loud, but they endure. For billions of years they have endured. And when we listen, truly listen, we can hear the first breaths of life's greatest transformation echoing through stone. For us, oxygen is life. We draw it in with every breath, and without it we last only moments. It feeds the fire in our blood, it fuels every heartbeat, every spark of thought in our minds. But in the Archean world, oxygen was no blessing. To the vast kingdoms of microbes that had thrived for billions of years in its absence, oxygen was something very different. It was poison. Imagine the world just before the first hints of oxygen began to gather. Life was everywhere, invisible, but abundant. Thick mats of anaerobic microbes stretched across the shallows, dark and soft beneath the tides. Communities of bacteria thrived in the depths, feeding on sulfur, iron, and carbon compounds, their metabolisms woven perfectly into a world without oxygen. They were the undisputed rulers of Earth, filling every niche they could, from the boiling vents at the seafloor to the quiet edges of coastal lagoons. To them, this was paradise. And then slowly, oxygen began to appear. At first, it was harmless in its scarcity, a trace gas that vanished as quickly as it formed, bound to iron or lost in the water. But over time, as cyanobacteria multiplied and iron supplies dwindled, oxygen no longer disappeared completely. It lingered. It began to creep into places it had never touched before. It seeped into the water columns, into the sediments, into the very habitats where anaerobic microbes had lived unchallenged for so long. To those microbes, oxygen was not a resource but a threat. Its reactive nature disrupted their chemistry, breaking apart molecules they depended upon, destroying the delicate balance of their lives. Where oxygen touched, cells faltered, metabolisms failed, colonies withered, entire ecosystems collapsed. For the first time in Earth's history, life itself was under siege by something life had created. This was no sudden cataclysm, no single day when the oceans turned deadly, no instant extinction. It was slower, more insidious, like a poison drip-fed into the veins of the planet. The anaerobic microbes resisted as long as they could. They retreated into oxygen-free pockets, deep sediments, hidden springs, dark places where oxygen could not reach. There they survived, and in some places they still survive today, clinging to the shadows of a world that once belonged entirely to them. But elsewhere, they perished. The oxygen spread too far, too steadily, for them to hold their ground. It was, in many ways, the first great extinction, not the last, nor the most famous, but one of the most profound. Countless species vanished, never to return. The diversity of anaerobic life that had flourished for eons was cut back, pruned by the sharp edge of a new gas. The paradise of the oxygenless Earth was over, and in its place a harsher, more dangerous world was being born. And yet, even as it was destroyed, oxygen was created. For though it was deadly to some, to others it offered a chance to harness its restless energy, to use it for survival, to grow stronger than any organism before. Out of the crisis emerged resilience, innovation, adaptation. Some microbes learned to breathe oxygen, to use it as fuel rather than fear it. They were the pioneers of a new metabolism, the ancestors of every creature that would one day walk, swim, or fly in the oxygenated world. Still, in this chapter of the story, the paradise has only just been broken. The skies are still dim, the seas still rust-rich, the continents still small and scattered. But beneath the surface, the old kingdoms of life are faltering. What was once a thriving realm is becoming a battlefield, where oxygen spreads like a slow fire through the waters, reshaping the very fabric of existence. It is strange to think that what we now call life's greatest gift was once its greatest threat. But that is the paradox of the Great Oxygenation Event. Paradise ended so that another might begin. Out of poison came possibility. Out of extinction came the breath of the future. For millions upon millions of years, oxygen had been a captive of the seas. Every molecule exhaled by cyanobacteria found itself chained almost immediately, bound to iron, swallowed by minerals, or dissolved into chemical reactions that erased its presence. The oceans were greedy, and the atmosphere remained untouched, cloaked still in its methane haze, unbothered by the quiet labor taking place below. But Nothing in Earth's story remains forever. As the cyanobacteria multiplied, their colonies spreading in shimmering mats across shallow waters, the supply of oxygen only grew. The oceans worked tirelessly to absorb it, feeding their iron-rich hunger, but there came a time when the balance began to shift. The iron was not infinite. Layer after layer of rust had been pulled from the waters and laid down upon the seabed, painted into the banded iron formations. Slowly, the seas lost their appetite. And then, almost without notice, a change occurred. Oxygen that had once vanished the moment it was born began, for the first time, to remain. A trace here, a whisper there, a fragile breath unclaimed by the waters. It drifted upward, molecule by molecule, breaking the surface of the sea and slipping into the waiting sky. At first, the atmosphere was hardly noticed. The haze of methane was thick, the carbon dioxide abundant. Against such a backdrop, the oxygen was little more than a faint seasoning, a dusting too thin to matter. Yet it was there, for the first time in Earth's history, free oxygen in the air. If we could stand in that time, what would we have seen? Perhaps very little. The skies still glowed with their amber hue, painted by methane and haze. The world still felt heavy, wrapped in a blanket of gases hostile to the creatures we are. And yet, something subtle was shifting. The balance of chemistry, the invisible architecture of the air, was beginning to bend toward change. To the microbes below, the difference was both salvation and ruin. Those who could not tolerate oxygen fled deeper, retreating into sediments and shadowy corners of the seas. But those who had learned to use it began to thrive, their metabolisms powered by oxygen's fiery energy. Slowly, a new lineage of life was taking root, even as the old ones faded. The atmosphere, meanwhile, grew restless. Oxygen is not a silent guest. It reacts, it transforms, it reshapes. The methane that had long cloaked the sky began to meet its end, oxidized away by this new arrival. With each encounter, the haze grew thinner, less certain. The sky that had been amber for eons began to clear, revealing, in glimpses, in whispers, a hint of the blue that would one day define Earth. It was not yet a transformation, not yet a sweeping change. The oxygen was still faint, a trace gas, a shadow of its future self, but its presence was undeniable. For the first time, Earth had drawn a breath that did not vanish into the oceans. For the first time, the air itself had begun to change. And so the whispers grew. They drifted across the seas, touched the land, brushed against the haze above. Oxygen had escaped its bonds. It was no longer just a prisoner of chemistry, no longer just rust upon the seafloor. It was a force now stirring in the open air, a whisper that would one day become a song that would never be silenced. For untold ages, Earth's skies had worn a mask. A thick haze of methane and organic particles cloaked the heavens in muted tones of amber and copper. When the sun rose, its rays seeped through like light through stained glass, dim and filtered, coloring the oceans with a perpetual twilight. This was the world's face for billions of years, strange, beautiful, and alien. But with oxygen now creeping into the air, the mask began to fray. Oxygen is a restless presence, always seeking partners, and it found one in methane. Whenever the two met, they reacted swiftly, transforming methane into carbon dioxide and water vapor. Slowly, molecule by molecule, the ancient cloak was being undone. At first, the change was invisible. The haze remained, its veil thick enough to dominate the skies. But behind it, in the chemistry of the air, a battle was underway. With every new breath of oxygen released by cyanobacteria, with every trace that slipped free from the oceans, another thread was pulled from the methane shroud. The fabric of the sky was thinning. Imagine standing on a basalt shore during this time. The horizon glows faintly, a band of orange against darker clouds. Above, the haze stretches as it always has, yet something feels lighter. The air seems less heavy, the sunlight a little less dim. Days pass into centuries, centuries into millennia, and the process continues. The haze, once unshakable, begins to falter. The amber tint grows patchy, the once uniform glow fractured by patches of clarity. And then, on some quiet morning lost to deep time, the change becomes undeniable. Where once the sky was copper and gold, a new color emerges, faint at first, but growing, blue. It must have been a sight beyond imagining, the first true blue sky in Earth's history. A color we take for granted today, but one that was utterly new to the Archean world. The oceans reflected it. deepening into shades more familiar to our eyes, transforming the face of the planet into something closer to the home we know. Arrival of blue skies was more than a visual wonder. It was a sign of profound transformation. The haze that had long trapped warmth was collapsing, and with its fall came consequences. Methane had been a potent greenhouse gas, keeping the young Earth warm beneath the faint sun. With it diminished, the planet grew vulnerable to cooling. Some scientists believe this shift may have helped trigger the first great glaciations when ice stretched across much of the globe. The skies cleared, but the Earth shivered. Yet even with such consequences, the change carried promise. A clearer sky allowed sunlight to reach the surface more directly, energizing the microbial mats below, fueling photosynthesis, encouraging yet more oxygen release. It was a feedback loop. The clearer the skies, the more oxygen could spread, and the more the haze was undone. And so the Earth took on a new face. The endless amber twilight gave way to blue, the seas reflected brighter light, the landscapes basked under skies no longer muffled by haze. It was a quieter kind of beauty, a subtler one, but also a promise of what was to come. For under these skies, oxygen would gather, and with it, the foundations of a breathable world. The haze was not gone entirely, not yet, but it was disappearing, thread by thread, breath by breath, and with every part of it that faded, the true sky of Earth was revealed, vast, blue, and waiting for the future. The skies had cleared, the haze had thinned, and for the first time, Earth wore the blue of its true heavens. It was a breathtaking transformation, a signal that oxygen had begun to weave itself into the air. Yet beauty often carries consequences, and in this case, the cost of clarity was cold. Methane had long been the planet's great blanket. Trapped in the thick atmosphere, it caught the warmth of the sun and held it close, keeping Earth's oceans liquid even though the young sun was weaker than the star we know today. With oxygen rising and methane vanishing, that blanket was stripped away. The planet, left bare beneath its pale star, began to cool. The change was slow, measured not in days or years, but in the vast sweep of geological time. At first, there may have been only a subtle chill, mornings a little crisper, seas carrying a faint bite of cold, but the cooling deepened. Seasons shifted, storms raged, glaciers formed on mountain flanks and crept downward toward the seas. Ice, once a stranger to much of the Earth, began to claim it piece by piece. Imagine those oceans now. Where once the waves shimmered dark with iron, they grew capped with floating ice. Shelves stretched outward, white and glittering under the dim sun, cracking and groaning as they expanded. On the continents, snow piled in relentless layers, compressing into glacial masses that ground across the land like slow rivers of stone. Valleys carved by volcanic fire were recast by the patient hand of ice. Life, the frozen world, was a new trial. Microbes had endured heat and poison, floods and eruptions, and now they faced the grip of cold. Many perished as habitats shrank, as seas iced over, as energy grew scarce beneath frozen surfaces. But even here, even in the stillness of ice, pockets of survival endured. Around volcanic vents, warmth still bubbled from Earth's heart, cradling colonies of microbes in hidden oases. Beneath the ice, in liquid brines and sheltered lakes, life clung on. Small, invisible, but unyielding. The frozen Earth was a world of contrasts. Above, the silence of ice stretched across continents and oceans, glittering under a pale sun. Below, in the unseen depths, life pulsed on, fragile yet determined. The microbes that had birthed oxygen did not falter. Their mats still breathed in the shallows where light could penetrate. Their colonies still rose as stromatolites in places spared from total ice. Day after day, year after year, they continued their quiet work, releasing oxygen into a world wrapped in frost. And slowly, imperceptibly, the balance shifted once more. As oxygen accumulated, as carbon dioxide and other gases lingered, the frozen grip began to ease. The planet thawed in cycles, ice advancing, retreating, advancing again, a rhythm that would echo through Earth's history. Each freeze was harsh, but each retreat opened new waters, new coastlines, new places for microbes to expand. To us, these frozen episodes might seem like catastrophe, but in the story of life, they were something else, crucibles. They tested endurance, they forced innovation, they shaped the resilience of the living world. And when the ice receded, what emerged was not defeat but renewal, ecosystems reborn, landscapes reshaped, oxygen stronger than before. So the frozen world, though cruel, was also a step forward. Out of its silence came strength. Out of its trials came survival. The earth, blanketed in white, was not a tomb but a forge, a place where life was tempered, where oxygen gained its foothold, where the story of breath pressed on through the chill of deep time. For ages, oxygen had been little more than a whisper, a fleeting breath erased by the hunger of oceans or the greed of minerals. It was born in countless bubbles by cyanobacteria, only to vanish, bound to iron, buried in sediments, lost to chemistry. But time is patient, and persistence is the quiet engine of transformation. At last, after millions upon millions of years, the balance tipped. Oxygen, once devoured the moment it appeared, began to linger. The seas were no longer an endless sponge for the new gas. Much of the dissolved iron had already been drawn out of solution, carried downward as rust, and locked into stone. The appetite of the oceans was growing thin, and so oxygen that once vanished without a trace began to accumulate in the water, and from there to escape into the seas. Imagine the air of that time. For so long, it had been heavy with methane, carbon dioxide, and haze. But now, for the first time, oxygen was present in measurable amounts. Not enough for us to breathe, not yet. The air would still have been lethal to modern lungs. But to the history of the Earth, this was a threshold, a dawning. The air was changing, reshaping itself into the blueprint of the breathable skies to come. Day by day, the process continued. The microbial mats of cyanobacteria, stretched across shallow waters, glistened in the sunlight. Each cell was a factory, a tiny lantern producing oxygen. Each tide carried the product of their labor into the wider seas. Each gust of wind that brushed the ocean's surface carried a little more oxygen upward, across the boundary between sea and sky. And there it stayed. Not all of it, not even most of it, but enough that the air was no longer the same. The world must have felt different under this new atmosphere. The skies, already clearing with the collapse of methane haze, deepened into more vibrant blues. Sunlight reached the surface with greater clarity, warming the seas and land beneath. Clouds formed in cleaner air, their shapes sharper, their shadows stretching across oceans that now mirrored the brightening sky. It was as though Earth, after so long hidden, had stepped into its true light. But the transformation was not only visual, it was chemical, biological, foundational. With oxygen in the air, new reactions became possible. Minerals weathered differently, soils formed in new ways, rivers carried altered chemistries to the seas. The face of the land itself was being reshaped by invisible breath, and within the microbial world, opportunities multiplied. Those who had learned to tolerate oxygen now began to thrive, their metabolisms supercharged by its fiery energy. For them, this was not poison but power, and with it, the seeds of complexity were sown. Still, it was a fragile dawn. Oxygen levels rose slowly, faltering at times, held in check by Earth's many balancing acts. The atmosphere did not transform in an instant. It wavered, climbed, dipped, and climbed again, a long and uneven journey. But the direction was clear. The Earth was moving toward a future where oxygen would no longer be rare, where each breath would echo across sky, sea, and stone. To us, this chapter of history is humbling. Every breath we take today is built upon this moment, the dawn when oxygen first began to fill the air, when the invisible tide turned in favor of a world that could one day support forests, animals, and human lives. Without it, our lungs would be empty, our fires impossible, our world barren of everything we call familiar. And so we look back, through billions of years, to the dawn of breathable skies. A dawn not marked by a single sunrise, but by countless days and nights, countless tides and storms, countless microbial sighs, all building together into the air we now carry within us. The first true breath of the planet had begun, and from that moment onward, the story of life would never be the same. When oxygen began to linger in the air and accumulate in the seas, it was not a gentle gift for most of the living world. For countless organisms, it was a nightmare made real, an invisible toxin that crept into their homes, disrupted their chemistry, and erased their chance to survive. Whole lineages that had thrived in the oxygen-free world were driven to extinction, their dominion over Earth's biosphere shattered. It was, in its quiet way, a cataclysm. But extinction is never the whole story, for even as many perished, others endured. Life is nothing if not inventive, and in the face of adversity, it bends, it shifts, it discovers new paths forward. Among the microbial realms of the Archean, there were survivors who found refuge in shadowed places, in sediments beneath the sea floor, in deep springs where oxygen could not reach, in the oxygen-poor corners of the world. They clung on, hidden, diminished, but not gone. And astonishingly, many of them are still with us today. To this day, in the darkest places of Earth, in the black depths of ocean trenches, in sulfurous pools, in the bellies of rocks, descendants of those ancient anaerobes still thrive, a reminder of the time before breath. Yet survival alone was not the greatest story. Innovation was. Some microbes, instead of fleeing the rising tide of oxygen, faced it. They learned to tolerate it, then to use it, and at last to master it. Oxygen, once deadly, became for them a tool of extraordinary power. In their tiny cellular machinery, they developed ways to harness oxygen's reactivity, channeling its energy into their metabolisms. These were the pioneers of aerobic respiration, and they changed everything. To appreciate their leap, we must pause to understand. Before oxygen, life's energy came from slower, less efficient processes, the breaking of chemical bonds in sulfur or carbon, the harvesting of light in modest ways. But oxygen offered a different scale of power. To use, it was to tap into an energy source magnitudes greater than any that had come before. It was like trading a flickering lantern for a roaring fire. Those who could wield it grew stronger, faster, more capable. They multiplied more quickly, spread more widely, and endured more challenges. Imagine those microbes, adrift in the oceans of the Proterozoic dawn. Tiny cells, unseen to any eye, yet blazing inside with newfound energy. They were innovators, explorers of possibility. Their metabolisms churned with vigor, their descendants spreading into niches that had once been denied them. With every replication, every colony formed, they carried the secret of oxygen's use, a secret that would become the inheritance of all complex life. This innovation did not happen overnight. It unfolded across generations beyond counting, across millions of years, each tiny step an experiment written in the language of survival. Mutations gave rise to new enzymes, new pathways, new strategies for handling oxygen's volatile nature. Some failed, their lineages cut short, but others succeeded, and those successes became the bedrock of biology as we know it. In this way, catastrophe became an opportunity, poison became power. From the devastation of the Great Oxygenation Event, the first aerobic organisms emerged, the survivors who were not only spared but transformed. They were the innovators who set the stage for everything to come, for eukaryotes, for multicellularity, for plants and animals, for us. And yet, it is worth remembering that these triumphs were not obvious at the time. The Earth was still a hard, hostile place. Oxygen levels were unstable, rising and falling in fits and starts. Ice had spread across the world, then retreated. Volcanoes still rumbled, continents still shifted, seas still heaved with change. The innovators lived in a world of flux, but through their persistence, they carried forward the possibility of complexity. When we breathe today, drawing oxygen deep into our lungs, we echo their innovation. Our cells still use the same pathways first discovered by those ancient microbes. Our strength, our speed, our very lives are tied to their invention. The survivors and innovators of the Great Oxygenation Event are our ancestors, not in name but in chemistry, in the hidden code of respiration. Without them, the story of life would have ended long before it began. As oxygen gathered in the lower skis, spreading slowly across Earth's atmosphere, it carried with it an unexpected gift, one that no microbe intended, yet one that would shape the destiny of every creature to come. It was a gift hidden in chemistry, born high above the surface, where air grows thin and sunlight burns without mercy. For sunlight, while nurturing, also holds danger. The rays that warm our skin and light our days are only part of its spectrum. Beyond the colors we see lies ultraviolet radiation, fierce and invisible, capable of shattering molecules and damaging delicate life. In the Archean world, with its methane haze and oxygenless air, nothing blocked these rays. The seas shielded their dwellers, and rock sheltered those on land, but the open sky was perilous. Without protection, life could never have risen freely to the surface. But oxygen, once loose in the air, began to change that. Some of it drifted higher, carried by winds into the upper reaches of the atmosphere. There, under the direct blaze of the sun, oxygen molecules split apart. Their fragments recombined into a new form, O3, ozone. At first there was little, a patchwork shield, thin and fragile, but as oxygen levels grew, so too did this new layer. The ozone began to spread across the stratosphere, forming a protective veil that absorbed the harshest ultraviolet rays. Slowly, invisibly, the skis themselves became guardians. For the first time in Earth's history, the surface of the planet was bathed not in unfiltered radiation, but in sunlight softened and made safer by the shield above. Imagine standing beneath those skis as the change unfolded. The difference would not be visible to the eye. The sunrises would still paint the world in gold and crimson, the clouds would still drift in their endless patterns, the stars would still pierce the night. But something had shifted. The light felt upon the skin of a rock or the membranes of a microbe near the surface was gentler now, less destructive, more nourishing. The Earth was learning to protect its children. The ozone layer was more than a shield, it was a promise. It meant that life could one day step closer to the surface without fear. It meant that shallow waters could become safe nurseries. It meant that the land, long a barren and hostile place, might one day welcome the first green shoots and creeping animals. The path from microbial mats to forests and fields, from stromatolites to humanity, would never have been possible without this hidden guardian above. And yet it is humbling to remember that this gift was not planned. The cyanobacteria did not strive to create ozone. They did not intend to build a shield for the future. They only sought to survive, to use light and water to grow, to release the byproduct of oxygen into the air. The rest was chemistry, a fortunate accident woven into the fabric of the cosmos. From simple survival came protection, from unintended breath came the safety of the skis. Today we depend utterly upon that shield. Every plant that stretches toward the sunlit air, every animal that roams the fields, every human who looks upward and marvels at the heavens, all of us are sheltered beneath the ozone's embrace. Without it, Earth's surface would still be scoured by invisible fire, and life would remain confined to the depths of the sea or the shelter of stone. So we look back across the chasm of time to the hidden gift of ozone. It was born quietly, molecule by molecule, high in the sky where no eye could see, yet its presence changed everything. It is the reason we walk the earth, the reason we bask in sunlight, the reason forests and meadows and civilizations exist at all. Oxygen gave us breath, but ozone gave us safety. Together, they made the world a home. The rise of oxygen was not only a story of seas and skis, it was also a story written upon the land, etched into the very bones of the planet. As oxygen spread, it began to alter the surface of Earth in ways subtle at first, but profound over time. The landscapes of the Archean, once dark and volcanic, cloaked in basalt and unweathered stone, were about to be transformed. For billions of years, the land had been raw. Lava poured from fissures and hardened into jagged rock. Mountain roots swelled and collapsed in endless cycles of tectonic restlessness. Rain fell from methane skis, carrying carbon compounds but little else, its waters carving channels but leaving behind soils poor and lifeless. The continents were barren and stark, painted in shades of gray and black. But oxygen, restless as ever, began to weave itself into the land. It touched the surfaces of rocks and altered them. Iron that once lay hidden in minerals reacted, staining stones with reds and browns. The gray of the world shifted toward color, the palette of the earth expanding under oxygen's brush. Where rivers ran, they carried oxygen with them, oxidizing sediments and changing their chemistry. The waters no longer carved stone alone. They reshaped it from within, breaking it down more quickly, creating clays and soils where none had existed before. Soils, that quiet, unassuming layer, are among the most important gifts oxygen ever gave. With oxygen weathering the rocks, particles broke apart and minerals recombined into fertile ground. Though plants were still billions of years away, the stage was being prepared. The continents were no longer lifeless slabs. They were beginning to soften, to build the foundation that would one day support forests, meadows, and farms. Imagine walking across one of these early continental surfaces. The ground beneath your feet would still feel barren, dotted with sharp stones and swept by winds. But here and there, colors would catch your eye: streaks of ochre red where iron had rusted in the open air, patches of soil forming in sheltered depressions, hints of change spreading across the land. Rivers would gleam differently now, their sediments tinted, their waters carrying the products of oxygen's quiet work. Even the mountains bore the mark of the new atmosphere. Exposed peaks weathered faster, their faces crumbling into rubble more readily. Oxygen accelerated the endless cycle of erosion, pulling minerals apart, feeding rivers with fresh debris. Over millions of years, entire landscapes were reborn, sharper valleys, richer soils, more varied terrains. And beneath it all, oxygen seeped into the very crust of the Earth. It transformed minerals, locking some elements away, freeing others to circulate anew. The geochemical cycles of the planet shifted, creating new balances of carbon, nitrogen, and sulfur. Life, chemistry, and geology had always been entwined, but now oxygen tied them together in ways that would ripple through every age to come. For the microbes, these changes were unnoticed. They went on with their lives in shallow seas and mats, breathing and exhaling as they always had. But the land around them was being prepared. Oxygen was writing a prologue to a story not yet begun, a story of plants rooting in soils, of rivers feeding valleys, of creatures roaming over fertile earth. Landscapes were reborn, not in an instant, not in a single dramatic gesture, but in the patient, relentless touch of oxygen. Rock by rock, grain by grain, the earth was remade. And though no eye saw it then, the transformation was a gift to the future. A gift to the green forests and golden fields that would one day sway under the winds. A gift to us, who walk upon soils born from oxygen's quiet hand. The earth had taken its first great breaths. Oxygen was in the seas, in the skis, and in the stones beneath our feet. The haze was gone, the skis blew, the landscapes reborn in color and fertile soils. The world seemed ready for a grand leap forward, and yet, for nearly 1 billion years, life remained quiet. It is one of the great mysteries of deep time, why, after oxygen first rose, did complexity wait so long to appear? The oceans teemed with microbes, the atmosphere carried breath, the land was changing, and still the earth did not yet bloom into forests or animals. It lingered instead in a strange silence, a pause between revolutions. Part of the reason lay in balance. Oxygen levels were not steady in those early days. They rose, they fell, they wavered across the ages. At times, the skis carried enough to alter the planet profoundly. At other times, the concentration dropped, retreating as if the Earth were exhaling and inhaling in uneven rhythms. The Great Oxygenation Event was not a single step upward, but a jagged climb, full of hesitations and reversals. For life, stability is as important as abundance, and the fluctuations may have slowed the march toward complexity. The oceans, too, carried their own challenges. Though the iron was largely gone, other elements, nickel, sulfur, even toxic compounds, lingered in abundance, shaping ecosystems in ways that made the leap toward multicellularity difficult. Microbes still ruled, thriving in their endless diversity, but the road forward remained narrow, waiting for the right moment, the right balance of conditions. And so the Earth entered what scientists sometimes call the boring billion, a stretch of time where little seemed to change in the fossil record, where microbial life continued much as it had for eons before, and where the world seemed to wait. But though it may appear uneventful, this was no wasted chapter. It was a time of refinement, of preparation, of slow, patient work. In those billion years, oxygen seeped deeper into the cycles of the Earth. It locked itself into rocks, it flowed through rivers, it shaped soils, it altered the chemistry of the oceans. It became the silent background of existence, no longer just a disruptive novelty, but a permanent part of the planet's rhythm. Life, too, was adjusting. Microbes experimented in their invisible ways, some forming symbiotic partnerships, others exploring new metabolic pathways, some beginning the slow journey toward eukaryotes, cells with nuclei that would one day build the foundations of complexity. Imagine the Earth in this long silence. The seas glittering blue, their surfaces bright with sunlight, their depths alive with microbes. Stromatolites still dotted the coastlines, layer upon layer rising patiently. Rivers ran across continents now rust-red and soil-brown, carrying minerals into the seas. Volcanoes still roared, glaciers still advanced and retreated, and the skis stretched vast and endless, painted in blues and whites. To the eye, it might have seemed a living planet, and indeed it was, but not yet an awakening one. It was a world still waiting, still holding its breath before the next great surge of life. And perhaps that waiting was necessary. Complex life is fragile. It requires stability, energy, balance. Oxygen had to rise high enough hold steady long enough, and weave itself deeply enough into Earth's systems before the leap could be made. The long silence was not emptiness, but patience. The planet was preparing itself, slowly, steadily, for the dawn that would follow. And when that dawn finally came, when oxygen levels held steady and eukaryotic cells took root, when complexity at last unfurled its wings, the Earth would never be the same again. But that story belonged to another time. For now, in this chapter, the Earth was quiet. Blue skies stretched overhead, microbes thrived below, and the silence before complexity lingered across 1 billion years. Take a slow breath. Feel it enter your lungs, cool and invisible, filling every space within. That breath, so simple and ordinary, is one of the most extraordinary gifts of our planet. It is oxygen, the same element first released into the Archean seas by colonies of cyanobacteria more than 2.5 billion years ago. Each inhale we take is not just an action of the moment, but an echo of deep time, a connection across billions of years to the tiny architects of the Great Oxygenation Event. It is humbling to imagine. For most of Earth's history, no such breath was possible. The skies were hostile, heavy with methane and carbon dioxide, unfriendly to lungs, hostile to complex life. For billions of years, if one could have stood on the shores of that world, no air would have been safe to breathe. And yet, day after day, tide after tide, tiny microbes released oxygen in whispers too faint to notice. They had no plan, no vision of the future. They sought only survival, only the energy of sunlight and water. And yet, in their persistence, they changed the fate of the planet. The breath you take now carries their legacy. Within your lungs, oxygen slips into your blood, clings to iron within hemoglobin, and is carried to every corner of your body. There, in your cells, it fuels the same chemistry first pioneered by the ancient innovators, aerobic respiration, the fire of oxygen harnessed to drive life forward. Every heartbeat, every thought, every step depends on this inheritance. Without those early microbes, without their patient labor across eons, there would be no forests, no animals, no humans. There would be no breath at all. And it is not only us. Look around the living world. In the forests, leaves spread wide to capture sunlight, releasing oxygen as they grow. In the oceans, plankton drift by the billions, tiny airs of cyanobacteria still exhaling breath into the sea and sky. In every creature that walks, flies, or swims, oxygen is the spark that keeps life burning. The entire planet, from the smallest insect to the tallest tree, from coral reefs to human cities, is woven together by the invisible thread of oxygen. The continuity of it is astonishing. The gas that fills your lungs may once have been breathed by a tree in an ancient forest, dissolved in the ocean depths, or drifted over mountains as wind. Trace it back further, and you reach the Archean world, where oxygen was born from sunlight and water by colonies of cells too small to see. That breath you hold is part of a cycle unbroken for billions of years, a cycle that began with the Great Oxygenation Event and has never ceased since. And in this way, time itself breathes. Each inhale we take is a bridge between then and now, a bridge between the microbial mats of the Archean and the bustling world of the present. When you pause and fill your lungs, you are participating in a story as old as Earth itself. The story of oxygen, the story of life, the story of survival and innovation written in every molecule. It is easy to forget, in the rhythm of our days, how miraculous this is. But if you listen closely, you can almost hear it, the faint echo of waves against Archean shores, the shimmer of stromatolites in shallow seas, the quiet exhalation of cyanobacteria releasing their waste into water. Those whispers built the air we live within now. Those whispers gave us the breath of time. So let us pause in gratitude, here in this cozy reflection. Each breath you take is a reminder we are children of oxygen, heirs of microbes, participants in a cycle that stretches back billions of years. Our lives are not separate from deep time, but entwined with it, as intimately as air fills our lungs. And so our story of oxygen reaches its quiet conclusion. We have traveled across billions of years, through oceans heavy with iron, skies veiled in haze, lands raw and barren, and worlds frozen under sheets of ice. We have followed the smallest of beings, cyanobacteria, humble microbes, tireless workers, as they exhaled a waste product that would one day become the foundation of breath itself. We have seen oxygen as poison and as salvation, as destroyer and as creator, as the unseen thread that stitched together the destiny of Earth. Now, as we sit here, wrapped in the comfort of our time, it is worth pausing to reflect on the wonder of it all. The Great Oxygenation Event was not sudden. It did not crash into history like a comet or roar like a supervolcano. It unfolded slowly, patiently, across millions upon millions of years. It was quiet, almost invisible, and yet it was one of the most profound transformations in the history of the planet. The lesson is simple and yet profound. Change often begins in whispers. Great revolutions do not always thunder when they arrive. Sometimes they build gently, molecule by molecule, moment by moment, until one day the world is remade. Think of the cyanobacteria again, no larger than dust, drifting in shallow seas. They had no vision of the future, no thought of forests or animals or humans. They only sought survival. Yet in their endless persistence, they gave us the skis, the soils, the shield of ozone, the breath we now carry. From invisibility came everything. And isn't that a cozy thought? That the vastness of our world, every mountain and meadow, every bird and river, every poem and song, rests upon the quiet labor of the unseen. That something as small as a microbe could carry within it the spark of everything to come. Now, as you breathe gently, let the connection settle in your heart. The air filling your lungs tonight is ancient. It has been part of oceans and stones, forests and storms. It has been shaped by microbes long vanished and by trees standing tall today. Each breath is not just air, but history, a thread of continuity that ties you to every moment that has ever been and every moment yet to come. When we close our eyes and imagine deep time, it can feel vast and overwhelming, stretching beyond comprehension. But stories like this remind us that even the grandest epochs are made of small things, of microbes exhaling, of rocks recording, of skis clearing. Deep time is not distant. It is here, flowing within us, carried in the breath of oxygen we share with every living being. And so, as our journey through the Great Oxygenation Event comes to an end, let us leave with a sense of wonder and peace. The Earth, in all its strangeness and beauty, is our home because of what happened in those distant seas. The gift of breath, the safety of ozone, the fertility of soils, the possibility of forests and futures, all of it began there, in the quiet work of unseen architects. So let us carry that story with us. Let it remind us that the smallest actions can ripple across time, that patience can reshape worlds, that life has a resilience and creativity far greater than we often imagine. And let it remind us that every inhale, every quiet moment of breath is not just survival, it is participation in the grand, cozy story of time. Thank you for joining me on this long journey into the deep past. May your evening be restful, your heart warmed, and your next breath filled with gratitude for the invisible, ancient gift of oxygen.